The wind howled through the walls of Castle Black, but inside the library, silence ruled. Samwell Tarly sat hunched over a pile of old, dusty scrolls. His hands trembled as he opened a parchment, one of the oldest he'd ever seen. Jon Snow had asked him to look into the lineage of the Targaryens, and though Sam hadn't expected much, what he found made his blood run cold. Bran Stark sat nearby, his eyes distant and glassy. He had returned from beyond the wall, a changed boy, no longer Bran, but the three-eyed raven. He didn't speak often, but when he did, his words carried weight. Sam glanced at him. "Bran, I think I've found something." Bran didn't blink. "I know." Sam's throat dried up. "You already saw it?" Bran finally looked at him. "You're talking about Jon. He's not who he thinks he is. He's not Ned Stark's bastard." Sam stood up slowly. "He's Rhaegar Targaryen's son, isn't he? And Lyanna Stark's?" Bran nodded once. "Aegon Targaryen, true heir to the Iron Throne." The door slammed open, and Jon stepped inside, snow dusting his black coat. "What's going on?" he asked, noticing their pale faces. Sam looked at Bran, unsure who should speak. Bran gestured to Sam. "Tell him," Sam swallowed. "Jon. You're not a Snow. You're not a Stark by blood." He paused, then added, "You're the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. Your real name is Aegon." Jon laughed bitterly. "That's not funny." "I saw the records myself," Sam said quickly. "Bran saw it in his visions. Your parents were married. You're the true-born heir to the throne." Jon shook his head, stepping back. "That's not possible. My father, Ned Stark, he wouldn't lie." Bran's voice was cold and calm. "He did, to protect you. Robert would have killed you if he knew." Jon felt like the floor beneath him cracked. He didn't know who he was anymore. Everything he believed, his name, his loyalty, his place in the world, had been a lie. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "Why now? Why tell me this now?" "Because the war's coming," Bran said, "and the North needs to know the truth. You're not just a fighter. You're a king." The three of them sat in candlelight that night, the storm outside raging louder than before. Sam unrolled a map of Westeros, pointing at King's Landing. "If we don't tell Daenerys, someone else will. She believes she's the last Targaryen. This changes everything." Jon looked torn. "She's already gathered armies. She's ready to take the throne. If I tell her I have a stronger claim, She might see you as a threat," Bran said, "or she might trust you more." Jon frowned. "I don't want the throne. I never did. But people might follow you anyway," Sam said. "And that makes you dangerous." They all knew Daenerys wasn't someone who liked threats. And if she found out the truth from someone else, it could tear everything apart. They needed a plan. A way to tell the truth without starting another war. Bran stared into the fire. "You have to tell her. But not now. Not until she trusts you completely." Jon nodded slowly. "Then I'll earn that trust." Outside, the storm began to fade, but inside their hearts, a different storm was rising. A truth had been uncovered, and now they had to decide what to do with it. The next morning, Jon stood on the cold balcony of Castle Black, watching the horizon. His breath came out in sharp puffs as he replayed Sam and Bran's words in his mind. Aegon Targaryen. It didn't feel real. It felt like a bad joke, or worse, like betrayal. The name didn't belong to him. He was Jon Snow, raised in the North, forged by ice and blood. But no, he was something else. Behind him, footsteps approached. "I thought you'd be gone already," said Sam quietly. Jon didn't turn. "I don't know who I am anymore, Sam. I don't even know what to fight for." "You fight for the living," Sam replied. "That hasn't changed. But you also fight for truth now. And whether you want the crown or not, the realm might need you to wear it." Jon finally turned. I'm not a king, but you could be a better one than any before you, Sam said. And you wouldn't do it for power. You'd do it to protect people. Later that day, Jon left Castle Black, heading south. His face was hard, unreadable. Only Sam and Bran knew the truth for now. They agreed it would stay between them until the right moment came. Meanwhile, in Dragonstone, Daenerys stood at the edge of a cliff, her silver hair whipping in the sea wind. She had just received word that Jon Snow was returning to her. A strange feeling stirred in her chest. She told herself it was strategy an alliance needed to defeat the White Walkers, but deep inside, it felt like more. When Jon arrived, she greeted him with her usual grace, but there was a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "You came back," she said simply. "I said I would," he replied. Over the next few days, Jon fought by her side, advised her in war councils, and even comforted her after the loss of one of her dragons. He earned the loyalty of her people, not just with his title, but with his honesty, his sacrifice, his pain. Daenerys began to trust him more than anyone else. And slowly, dangerously, she began to love him. But Bran had warned Jon, "Tell her only when you're sure she sees you as a brother in arms, not a rival." Jon wrestled with the burden of that secret. Every time Daenerys looked at him, every time she spoke of the Iron Throne, the truth choked him. How would she react when she learned she wasn't the last Targaryen? That her claim wasn't the strongest? In the quiet of night, Jon sat alone in the war room, staring at the painted table. He didn't hear Daenerys enter. "You look like you carry the weight of the world," she said softly. "I do," he replied without looking up. She came closer, her eyes searching his face. "Tell me." Jon stood up, the words burning on his tongue. He wanted to tell her, to confess everything, but he remembered Bran's advice. "Not yet. Not like this." Instead, he said, "There's something I need to tell you, but not now. Not until the war is over." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Is it about the North?" "It's about me," he said, "and it could change everything." She stepped closer, barely a breath between them. "Then I trust you to tell me when it's time." He nodded, guilt eating at him. He was lying to her, but only because he feared the truth would destroy them both. But far away, someone else was watching. Varys had noticed the glances, the quiet talks, the closeness between Jon and Daenerys. And he had started to ask questions, questions that led him to Samwell Tarly. In a quiet corner of Winterfell's library, Varys found Sam with an old scroll. He smiled politely. "Tell me, Samwell, have you come across anything interesting lately?" Sam froze. The Game of Thrones was beginning again. But this time, the truth was the weapon, and everyone wanted to be the first to strike with it. Varys was no stranger to secrets. He had spent a lifetime trading in whispers, building networks of spies across the 7 kingdoms. But this was different. The truth about Jon Snow wasn't just a whisper. It was wildfire. And wildfire, once lit, had a habit of consuming everything. After his brief conversation with Samwell, Varys didn't press too hard. He saw the fear in Sam's eyes, the hesitation. That was enough. Where there was smoke, there was always something burning. And now he had a direction. He returned to Dragonstone under the guise of loyalty, but inside, his mind raced. Jon Snow wasn't just a northerner. He wasn't just a war hero. If the whispers were true, and Varys trusted his instincts, Jon was a Targaryen, a true-born male heir. The realm would favor him over Daenerys. And Varys ... he was never loyal to people. He was loyal to the realm. That night, in the dimly lit strategy room, Varys stood beside Tyrion Lannister. He hesitated, then spoke. "What if there's someone better than Daenerys to rule?" Tyrion raised an eyebrow. "Better? Someone born here. Someone the people already love. Someone who doesn't burn his enemies alive, Tyrion's expression darkened. You're talking about Jon Snow. Varys didn't confirm it directly. The truth doesn't care about feelings, Tyrion. It cares about peace, stability. If she finds out someone else has a stronger claim, what do you think she'll do? Tyrion fell silent. He had seen the fire in Daenerys' eyes too many times, and it wasn't always righteous. Sometimes it was hunger, a hunger for power, for obedience. And if Jon truly had the better claim, while the lords whispered, Jon and Daenerys prepared for war. The Night King had broken through the wall. Winterfell was their last stand before the storm swallowed everything. Jon returned to the north, with Daenerys by his side. The people of Winterfell stared at her with cold suspicion, their loyalty still rooted in the Starks. But Jon's presence softened the tension. He stood tall and silent, never raising his voice, but always heard. Arya watched them from the shadows. Sansa watched them from the walls. And Bran ... he simply waited. The reunion between Arya and Jon was warm, but brief. Between strategy meetings and war planning, there was little time for old smiles. One evening, Sansa pulled Jon aside. "She's beautiful, I'll admit," she said, eyeing Daenerys from across the great hall. "But she frightens me." "She wants to help," Jon said. "She wants to rule," Sansa corrected. "And when she finds out what you are, what happens then?" Jon clenched his jaw. "You know, Bran told me," she said, folding her arms. "And Arya knows too." Jon looked between his siblings now, cousins now, and felt the walls closing in. Too many people knew. Too many mouths could speak. Sansa leaned closer. "You may not want the crown, Jon, but you may not have a choice." And just as she predicted, the truth began to leak. Varys sent his first raven that night. A coded message to an old contact in Dorne. Tyrion begged him to stop. "If she finds out, she'll burn you alive. Then let her," Varys said softly. "I will have done what I must." The next day, Jon stood before a crowd in the Winterfell courtyard. Warriors, lords, wildlings, and even dragons watched from a distance. He didn't plan to speak, but his heart was too heavy with silence. "The enemy is coming," he said. "It doesn't care who sits on the throne. It doesn't care about blood or names. It only wants death. We fight together, or we die alone." And the people cheered. They didn't cheer Daenerys. They cheered Jon. Daenerys stood in the shadows, hearing the roar that should have belonged to her. She smiled outwardly, but inside, something cracked. Later, she found Tyrion by the fire. "Did you know?" she asked. Tyrion paused, then nodded. "I heard whispers. And you didn't tell me?" "I was trying to protect you," he said. Daenerys looked away. "No, you were trying to protect him." She walked off, her mind boiling. Not just with betrayal, but with fear. She had faced tyrants, slavers, armies, but never someone who could take everything from her without raising a sword. And that night, as snow fell softly over Winterfell, she whispered to herself, "If Jon is the rightful heir, then he is the greatest threat I've ever faced." Winterfell slept under a thick blanket of snow, but inside its ancient walls, unrest stirred like a brewing storm. Daenerys stood alone in the crypts, staring at the statue of Lyanna Stark. Her breath was shallow, her mind racing. She now knew. Jon hadn't told her Tyrion had confirmed what Varys had whispered, but it was enough. "This is the woman he loved," Daenerys muttered, her voice echoing. "The one he died for. And the one who gave him the throne I bled for." She wasn't just jealous. She was scared. Jon wasn't a traitor. He didn't crave power. And that made him even more dangerous. Above her, in the great hall, Sansa watched from the balcony as lords and knights swore fealty to Jon after a stirring speech about unity. His words were humble. He spoke not like a king, but like a brother, a man of the people. And that made the people love him even more. Arya leaned against the wall beside her sister. She's going to kill him, she said bluntly. Sansa turned. What? If she thinks he'll take her throne, Arya whispered, she'll burn everything in her path, including him. Sansa didn't want to believe it. But she knew Arya's instincts were rarely wrong. The very next day, Jon finally sat down with Daenerys, just the two of them, away from the noise, away from the War Council. He was tired of the silence, tired of carrying the truth like a chain around his neck. There's something I need to say, he began. Daenerys interrupted him, her voice cold. Your name is Aegon Targaryen. Jon froze. I know, she continued, rising to her feet. I know everything. Your parents were married. You have the claim. Jon's heart sank. Who told you? Does it matter? She snapped. Everyone seems to know, except the one who should have heard it first. I didn't want it to change us, Jon said. Because I don't want the throne. I never did. Daenerys stepped closer, eyes shining with fury. But it changes everything, Jon. Whether you want it or not, people will follow you. You can't stop them. Jon took her hand, desperate. Then help me stop it. Help me fight the dead. Help me save the living. We'll deal with the rest after. She didn't pull away, but her grip was ice cold. After, she repeated, as if the word tasted bitter. But Jon didn't notice the shift in her eyes, the way her love was slowly being replaced with fear and ambition. That night, Bran sat beneath the weirwood tree, his eyes white with vision. When he returned to himself, Arya was already waiting. What did you see? She asked. Bran's voice was calm, flat. Fire, death, a city burning. King's Landing? Arya asked. Yes. Arya narrowed her eyes. Was it the Night King? Bran didn't answer. Just one word slipped from his mouth like a curse. Daenerys. Meanwhile, Tyrion struggled with his conscience. Varys had begun spreading the truth more widely, secret messages sent to Dorne, the Vale, the Stormlands. Lords were starting to ask questions. Some even replied subtly with words of support for Jon. Daenerys, though, remained unaware of just how far the truth had spread. But Tyrion knew it was only a matter of time before her paranoia ignited. Then came the letter from Varys to the north, a raven Jon never saw. But Sansa did, and her eyes went wide with horror as she read the words. Aegon Targaryen must rule. Daenerys must be stopped before she burns the realm. She is not her father's daughter, but worse, she has dragons, and no one left to tell her no. Sansa rushed to find Jon, but he was already preparing for battle. The Night King was near. None of them knew how much time they had. But one thing was certain. If Jon lived through the war, he wouldn't face just the White Walkers. He'd have to face the Dragon Queen, and she might not leave him alive. The army of the dead had arrived. The skies above Winterfell turned black as snow, and ash danced in the wind. Ghostly screeches from the Night King's undead dragon echoed like thunder, shaking the walls. Jon stood atop the battlements, sword drawn, eyes fixed on the endless wave of corpses marching toward them. Beside him, Daenerys rode Drogon through the blizzard, her silver hair whipping wildly. Fire lit the sky, but it was never enough. For every white that burned, 10 more rose from the frost. Jon fought like a man with nothing to lose. He didn't think about thrones, or secrets, or bloodlines. He thought only of survival, of protecting the living. But even in the chaos, he could feel Daenerys' eyes on him, watching not just how he fought, but how they cheered for him, how they followed him. At one point, Jon and Daenerys met in the courtyard mid-battle. Their faces were bloodied, their breathing ragged. Drogon roared above. "Burn the trench," Jon yelled. Daenerys hesitated. Her dragon hovered, but she didn't move. "Now," he screamed. She obeyed, but her eyes didn't match her fire. There was something strange in her expression. Not anger, not fear, but calculation. The dead breached the walls. Chaos followed. Brienne screamed orders. Arya danced through shadows like death itself. Sansa and the others waited in the crypts below, praying the stones wouldn't become their tomb. And then Bran ... He waited beneath the weirwood tree, guarded by Theon and a few others. His mind was elsewhere, scanning the past, the present, the 1,000 paths of the future. The Night King arrived without sound. Jon saw him from the distance and broke through the madness to reach him. But whites blocked his way again and again. And as the final confrontation approached, Jon was too far. It was Arya who struck. The dagger flashed in the cold air, and with a single blow to the chest, the Night King shattered. The army collapsed like puppets cut from strings. Silence followed. Victory, but it felt like grief. The bodies of the fallen were everywhere. Jorah, Theon, Lyanna Mormont. The price of survival had been too high. And though the war was over, something colder than winter now stirred. In the days that followed, fires burned for the dead, but peace did not follow. The realm hailed Jon Snow as a hero. Soldiers bowed, lords whispered. The people began to say the words out loud. He should be king. Daenerys watched it all with a smile carved from stone. When she finally confronted Jon, they were alone in the Godswood. "You fought bravely," she said softly. "So did you." She looked at him with something close to heartbreak. "They love you. They love you too." "No," she said. "They fear me. There's a difference." He stepped closer. "You're their queen." "I was supposed to be," she whispered. "Until they saw you. Until they learned who you are." Jon looked away. "I never wanted it. You know that. But they do," she said. "And soon they'll stop asking who you are and start asking why you're not sitting on the throne." Her hand reached for his. "Say it, Jon. Swear to me. Swear you'll never claim it. Not even if they beg you." Jon didn't answer. And that silence broke something inside her. Elsewhere, Varys paid the price for his whispers. Daenerys summoned him to the courtyard, surrounded by Unsullied. "You betrayed me," she said. "I told the truth," Varys replied. "And I did what I must for the good of the realm." Jon stood nearby, silent, watching. Daenerys didn't blink. Dracarys. The flames devoured Varys before his screams could rise. And in that moment, Jon realized this was not the woman he fell for. This was a queen made of fire and fear. Later that night, he went to Tyrion. "She killed him without trial," Jon said. "And she'll kill again," Tyrion replied. "She already sees you as a threat. She said she loved me." Tyrion's voice broke. "So did her father. Right before he burned my brother alive." Jon stared into the fire. His face was pale. His hands shook. The battle with the dead was over. But the battle for the soul of Westeros had just begun. And this time, the enemy wore a crown. King's Landing stood quiet, unaware that judgment was on its way. Civilians hurried through narrow alleys. Merchants shouted over one another in the marketplace, and children played near the Red Keep, unaware their lives hung by the thinnest thread of dragonfire. Daenerys stood at the bow of her ship, eyes locked on the distant capital. Behind her, dragons circled the skies like a shadow of death. She didn't smile. Her heart had hardened. She had crossed the sea for justice, for freedom. But all she found in Westeros was betrayal. The people didn't love her. They whispered about Jon. The lords didn't kneel. They questioned her blood. And now, the last thread of patience inside her had snapped. "We will take the city," she said to her council, "and they will fear me if they will not love me." Tyrion stepped forward. "There are women and children in the city. Let the bells ring for surrender. If they do, please stop the attack." She didn't respond. Jon watched her from across the room. The woman he once followed into fire now stood colder than snow. She barely looked at him anymore. Her trust had vanished the moment she knew the truth. Before leaving Dragonstone, Tyrion released Jaime Lannister, captured trying to reach Cersei. "Save the innocent," Tyrion begged. "Ring the bells." "End it before she does." Jaime nodded, but deep down, Tyrion knew it was hope more than plan. The next morning, King's Landing braced itself. Daenerys' forces lined the hills, unsullied, Dothraki, Northmen. Jon led the vanguard, but felt hollow inside. Arya rode with the Hound, her face tight with quiet fury. She wasn't here for war, she was here for Cersei. As the battle began, the city held its breath. Daenerys flew in from the east, Drogon roaring over the gates. The Iron Fleet burned first, then the Scorpions lining the walls. The Golden Company barely had time to raise their swords before they were reduced to ash. Then came the moment Cersei's soldiers dropped their weapons. The city rang with the sound of surrender. Bells echoed from the towers, loud, clear, final. Jon stood still in the square. "It's over," he muttered. But Daenerys didn't hear the bells. Or maybe she did and ignored them. She looked down from Drogon's back, at the Red Keep, at the people who once mocked her name. Her face twisted not in rage, but in a terrible, broken calm. Then she gave the order, Drogon Dove. Fire rained down not on soldiers, but on the streets, the marketplaces, the homes, the children. The city screamed. Jon stared in horror. "No, no," he shouted, pushing through flames, trying to stop his men from joining the slaughter. But chaos had taken over. The Northmen, the Dothraki, they followed the Dragon Queen's fury without question. Women burned with their babies. Fathers died shielding sons. And Arya ran through a city collapsing in ash, trying to save a single innocent soul. But it was no use. Death spared no one. In the Red Keep, Jaime found Cersei. They tried to escape through the tunnels, but the stones fell too fast. In the final seconds of their lives, they died as they had lived together, under the weight of a crumbling kingdom. Back outside, Jon fought against his own. He killed 2 Northmen trying to harm a family. His sword dropped to the ground. This was not victory. This was madness. As the fires finally died and smoke blanketed the ruins, Daenerys stood among the ashes. Her army roared. She raised her arms like a goddess born from flame. But there were no people left to crown her, only dust and silence. Tyrion watched her from the shadows, tears in his eyes. "I freed a tyrant," he whispered. Jon found Arya near the ruins of the bell tower. Her face was black with ash, her voice low. "You saw what she did. You know what she is." He didn't answer. "She burn again," Arya said. "And the next time, it'll be winterful." Jon turned away, but Arya stepped in front of him. "You're the true heir. You're the only one left who can stop her." Jon looked toward the throne, still standing among broken stones. And for the first time, he knew what he had to do. King's Landing no longer breathed. It was a graveyard of stone and ash. The once mighty capital of Westeros now whispered only of death. Smoke curled through the broken towers like ghosts. Mothers wailed over charred remains. The air was thick not just with the stench of fire, but with fear. At the center of it all stood Daenerys Stormborn. Her white hair blew gently in the wind as she ascended the steps of the Red Keep, now nothing but cracked stone and scorched walls. Drogon roared behind her like a god of war. The Unsullied flanked her, disciplined and silent. Grey Worm's face was stone. There was no mercy left in him. The Iron Throne waited ahead. Tyrion approached her slowly, the hand's pin shaking in his grip. He stared at her with hollow eyes. "You slaughtered a city," he said. "They chose their fate," she replied. "They followed a tyrant. I gave them freedom." Tyrion stepped forward, pulled the handpin from his chest, and threw it to the ground with a clang that echoed through the dead hall. "I freed you in Essos, because I believed you'd break the wheel," he said. But now I see you are the wheel. Daenerys' expression darkened. You betrayed me. And you betrayed everything you claimed to be? She didn't argue. She only gave Grey Worm a nod. 2 soldiers seized Tyrion and dragged him away. Jon watched from afar. His heart was a storm. He wanted to believe this was a mistake. That grief had twisted her, that she could still return from the edge. But every time he looked at the blackened ruins around him, hope died a little more. Arya stood beside him, quieter than usual. Her voice was sharp. If you don't do it, she'll burn every kingdom that resists her. Winterfell, the North, us. Jon's hands trembled. She believes she's right. So did her father, Arya snapped. And you stabbed him in the heart, remember? That's why you joined the Night's Watch, to stop mad kings. Jon turned to her, haunted. She's not just a queen to me, Arya. I loved her. Then do it because you loved her. Jon went to see her one last time. The snow fell softly now, covering the ruins like a shroud. Drogon watched him approach the throne room, rising from a pile of rubble, eyes glowing. The dragon stared into him, perhaps sensing his blood, perhaps sensing his heart, but he allowed Jon to pass. Inside, Daenerys stood before the Iron Throne, staring at it. She touched it gently, almost lovingly. The throne that had killed so many dreams now stood as the final temptation. Jon stepped closer. She turned to him with a smile. We freed the people. You burned children in the streets, Jon replied, voice trembling. You made them ashes. Daenerys stepped forward, her voice softer now. It was necessary. I had to show strength. I had to give them a new world. And if they don't want your world, they don't get a choice. Silence. Cold. Heavy. Jon looked into her eyes. You will keep burning anyone who doesn't kneel, won't you? She nodded, unashamed. That's how peace is built. He stepped closer. You are my queen, she smiled. He kissed her, and as her lips trembled against his, the dagger slid between her ribs. She gasped, her eyes widening with shock, confusion, and betrayal all at once. Blood spilled from her mouth as she stumbled back. Jon caught her as she fell, holding her in his arms. Forgive me, he whispered, tears falling freely. You were the only one I ever loved. Daenerys died in silence. Outside, Drogon sensed her death. He howled a sound that shook the heavens. He soared into the sky, landed before the throne, and stared at Jon with rage. But he didn't burn Jon. Instead, Drogon unleashed his fire on the Iron Throne, melting it down to molten steel, destroying the very symbol of destruction that had corrupted them all. Then, gently, Drogon lifted Daenerys' body in his claws and flew away into the clouds, into legend. Days passed. Jon surrendered himself. Grey Worm wanted his head. The North wanted Jon free. The lords of Westeros gathered in the ruins, each arguing over the future. It was Tyrion who suggested something new. Let the leaders choose their king. No more birthright. Let the realm decide. They voted. They argued. And finally, they chose Bran, the broken keeper of memories, the one who knew the past and could guide the future. Bran named Tyrion as his hand. Jon was exiled to the Night's Watch once more, a man who saved the world, punished for saving it the wrong way. Sansa declared the North free. Arya sailed west, where maps ended. And Jon rode north, beyond the wall, beyond crowns and thrones, into the snow. He looked back once, then disappeared into the white. The game of thrones had ended not with victory, not with justice, but with loss, with fire, and with a truth too heavy for the world to carry.